What if the greatest ancient mysteries in America are not made of stone, but built from earth? Hidden across Mississippi are three powerful sites that most people have never truly explored: the grand village of the Natchez Indians, the farm mounds, and the massive Emerald Mound. These are not just hills of dirt, they are sacred ground. Places where leaders once stood, ceremonies were held, and entire communities shaped their world centuries before modern America existed. The Grand Village was the heart of Natchez power. Farm Mounds hides 2,000-year-old burial secrets and long-distance trade connections. And Emerald Mound rises as one of the largest ancient earthworks in North America. Who built them? Why were they so important? And what happened to the people who once called them sacred? The land is quiet today, but the mysteries are still alive. Let's step back in time and uncover the stories buried beneath Mississippi's soil. Grand Village of the Natchez Indians, Fatherland Site. What if I told you that hidden in Mississippi, there is a place where a powerful native civilization once stood, ruled, worshipped, and made decisions that shaped their entire world? And today, most people drive past it without even realizing the ground beneath them holds centuries of history. This is the Grand Village of the Natchez Indians, also called the Fatherland Site. Long before highways, long before the United States existed, long before European settlers arrived in large numbers, this land was alive with ceremony and power. The Natchez people built this village as a political and spiritual center. It wasn't just a place to live, it was the heart of their world. When you imagine an ancient capital, you might think of giant stone temples or huge walls. But here, the Natchez built something different. They built massive earthen mounds. These mounds were not random hills. They were carefully shaped by human hands. Thousands of baskets of soil were carried and packed, layer by layer. It took planning. It took organization. It took leadership. At the center of the village stood three large mounds. On top of these mounds were important structures, temples, and homes for leaders. The most powerful leader was known as the Great Sun. It was not just a political leader, but the British cabinet led him by the nomination of Sun. He was believed to have a spiritual connection to the sun itself. Think about that for a moment. This was a society where leadership was tied to cosmic belief. The sun was not just something in the sky, it was sacred, and the Great Sun represented that power on earth. The largest mound, often called the Temple Mound, held the sacred fire. That fire was never allowed to go out. It symbolized life, continuity, and the strength of the Natchez people. But here's where the mystery deepens. Unlike civilizations that left behind written books, the Natchez passed down their stories through spoken word. When European colonists arrived in the late 1600s and early 1700s, they wrote down what they saw, but much of the deeper meaning, the true beliefs and rituals, were never fully recorded. We know the surface story, but we don't know everything. Archaeologists have studied the site for years. They have found pottery, tools, burial areas, and post holes from structures that once stood on the mounds. These discoveries confirm that this was not just a small settlement. It was organized, structured, important. Still, many questions remain. Why was this specific location chosen? How did they decide the exact shape and placement of each mound? What ceremonies took place at night, under the stars, when no outsiders were watching? One of the most dramatic parts of the Natchez history is what happened after European contact increased. Tensions grew. Trade relationships became unstable. Conflicts erupted. In 1729, the Natchez attacked a French settlement near Fort Rosalie. The French response was brutal. Within a few years, the Natchez Nation was scattered. Many were killed, others were sold into slavery. Some fled and joined other tribes. And just like that, the grand village lost its power. The mounds remained, but the people who gave them meaning were gone. That is the real mystery. Not just how it was built, but how quickly a thriving center of culture can disappear. Today, the Fatherland site is preserved as a state historic site in Natchez, Mississippi. There is a small museum, there are walking paths, the mounds are still there, rising quietly from the earth. The positive side of the present condition is protection. The site is maintained. Grass is cut. Informational signs explain the history. Archaeologists continue research carefully and respectfully. The land is recognized as sacred and important. There is also growing awareness and respect for Native American history. That is a powerful positive change. More people are learning that America's story did not begin in 1776. It began thousands of years earlier. But there are negatives too. The original wooden structures on top of the mounds are gone. Time erased them. Weather wore them down. What we see today is only the earth base, not the full village as it once looked. Another challenge is attention. The site does not receive the same number of visitors as larger famous landmarks. Some people simply do not know it exists. Without constant funding and public interest, smaller historic sites can struggle. And then there is the deeper loss, the cultural loss. When the Natchez people were scattered, parts of their traditions and stories were lost. Some descendants survive today, living in other tribal nations. But the original political and spiritual system, centered at the Grand Village, no longer exists in its original form. That absence creates a quiet sadness at the site. When you stand there today, it is peaceful. Birds fly overhead. The Mississippi sky stretches wide. The mounds look simple, almost like natural hills if you didn't know better. But once you understand what happened there, the silence feels heavier. You realize this was once a place of firelight, voices, ceremony, and power. Now it is quiet, grass, and wind. My opinion, I believe the Grand Village of the Natchez Indians is one of the most underrated historical sites in America. It may not have stone pyramids or giant statues, but it holds something just as important, a story of leadership, belief, resistance, and survival. It reminds us that advanced societies existed in North America long before European arrival. It challenges the false idea that history here was simple or empty. At the same time, it also reminds us how fragile civilizations can be. A few decades of conflict changed everything for the Natchez. The present situation at the Fatherland site is stable but delicate. It is protected by the state. It is open to visitors. Educational programs are held. The land is respected. But like all ancient sites, it depends on continued care, funding, and public interest. Without those, even preserved history can fade. The mounds still stand. They have stood through storms, wars, and centuries of change. And they continue to rise quietly from the Mississippi soil, not shouting their story, but waiting for those willing to listen. Far mounds, deep in the quiet countryside of northeastern Mississippi, far away from loud cities and busy highways, there is a place that looks simple at first glance, just open fields, trees, grass. But under that calm surface lies one of the oldest and most mysterious burial sites in the entire region. This is the Far Mounds. And the first mystery is this: Why would ancient people choose this exact spot to bury their dead nearly 2,000 years ago? Far mounds is not just one mound. It is a group of 8 large earthen burial mounds spread across the landscape. These were built during what historians call the Middle Woodland period, around 1 to 200 AD. That means these mounds are older than many famous European landmarks. Think about that. While the Roman Empire was still powerful across Europe, while ancient cities were rising and falling across the world, Native American communities here in Mississippi were carefully building these burial mounds by hand. No machines, no metal tools, only baskets, wooden tools, and human effort. Each mound was built by layering soil slowly, basket by basket. The shapes were smooth and rounded. Some were taller than others. They were not random piles of dirt. They were planned. But here is where the mystery grows deeper. Inside these mounds, archaeologists discovered burials, and with them, objects that came from far away. Copper from the Great Lakes region, marine shells from the Gulf Coast, stone materials that were not local. How did these objects travel such long distances nearly 2,000 years ago? There were no highways, no ships like today, no trucks. Yet somehow, trade networks existed across vast parts of North America. That tells us something important. The people who built far mounds were connected to a much larger world than we once believed. They were part of a wide trade system that moved goods, ideas, and possibly even spiritual beliefs across hundreds of miles. But we still do not know everything. We do not know the exact name of the group who built these mounds. Unlike the later Natchez civilization, there are fewer written records from European observers. Much of what we know comes from archaeology. And archaeology gives us pieces, not full stories. Another mystery is the meaning behind the burial patterns. Not everyone was buried in these mounds. Some individuals were placed with valuable items, while others were not. That suggests social structure, leadership, possibly spiritual roles. But what kind of society was it? Was there a single leader? Was power shared? Were these mounds built over generations to honor important families? We can study the soil, we can study the bones, we can study the artifacts. But we cannot fully hear their voices. That silence creates mystery. When archaeologists excavated parts of the mounds in the early 1900s, they found carefully arranged burials. Some were placed in specific positions, some were cremated, some were extended flat. These patterns were not accidents. They reflect belief systems about death and the afterlife. Imagine standing there at night, nearly 2,000 years ago, a funeral ceremony taking place. Firelight, singing, ritual objects placed with the deceased. Those moments happened. And today, all that remains are quiet, grassy hills. Now, let's talk about the present condition of far mounds. The positive side is that the site is preserved as a state park. It is protected land. The mounds are still clearly visible. Walking trails allow visitors to explore respectfully. Informational signs explain the history. The area is peaceful and natural. That protection is extremely important. Many ancient mound sites across the United States were destroyed during farming, construction, and development in the 1800s and early 1900s. Entire mounds were flattened without understanding their importance. Far mounds survived. That is a huge positive. Another positive is growing respect for Native American heritage. There are stronger laws today protecting burial sites. Archaeological research is done more carefully and with cultural awareness. But there are negatives too. Time is always the biggest enemy. Rain slowly erodes the earth. Wind reshapes the surface. Tree roots can damage the structure of the mounds. Because they are made of soil and not stone, they are more vulnerable to natural erosion. There is also the challenge of public awareness. Far Mounds is not a famous tourist destination. Many people in Mississippi have never visited it. Without strong tourism and funding, preservation efforts can become limited. Another sensitive issue is early excavation practices. In the past, archaeology did not always respect indigenous burial traditions. Some remains were removed and studied in ways that today would be handled differently. While many items have been returned or protected under modern laws, the past cannot be undone. That creates a complicated legacy. Still, when you visit today, the feeling is calm. You walk across open grass fields. The mounds rise gently from the ground. They do not look dramatic like pyramids. They are simple, quiet. But that simplicity hides age. They have stood there for nearly 2 millennia. They survived storms, wars, colonization, farming expansion, and modern change. That survival is powerful. In my opinion, Far Mounds is one of those places that proves history does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It may not have tall stone towers or giant statues. It does not look like something from a movie, but it represents deep time. It represents connection across regions. It represents belief systems that shaped lives long before written records here. And maybe that makes it even more important, because it reminds us that complex societies existed here long before modern borders. The present situation of Far Mounds is stable but fragile. It is preserved and open to the public. It is protected by state management. The land remains mostly natural, but like all earthen mound sites, it depends on continued care. Climate change, stronger storms, and natural erosion are real threats. Funding for smaller parks is always a challenge. Right now, the mounds stand quietly in the Mississippi landscape. They are not abandoned, they are not forgotten, but they are waiting. Waiting for people to understand that beneath those gentle hills lies a story nearly 2,000 years old, a story of trade, ceremony, belief, and human connection that still shapes the land today. Emerald Mound site. What if I told you that one of the largest ancient earthworks in North America is not in Mexico, not in Peru, but sitting quietly in Mississippi? No giant stone pyramids, no massive tourist crowds. Just a wide green platform rising from the land, almost blending into the horizon. This is the Emerald Mound site. And at first glance, it does not look dramatic. It looks like a large grassy hill with 2 smaller rises on top. You might even mistake it for a natural formation, but it is not natural. It was built by human hands merely 700 to 1,000 years ago, during what historians call the Mississippian period. That means while medieval castles were rising in Europe, Native American communities here were building one of the largest ceremonial platforms ever constructed in North America. Emerald Mound covers about 8 acres at its base. 8 acres. That is huge. It stands around 35 feet high, and on top of this massive platform, 2 smaller mounds were built later. This was not just a random hill. It was designed, carefully planned, built in stages. Layer by layer, soil was carried in baskets and packed tightly. Workers shaped it into a flat-topped platform. That flat surface was not for decoration. It held important structures, possibly temples, council buildings, or homes for leaders. Think about the effort required. Thousands of baskets of earth, carried by hand, no machines, no metal tools, just organization, leadership, and belief. And here is the mystery that immediately appears. Why build something this large out of earth? Why not stone? The answer may lie in the materials available. In this region, large stone quarries were not easily accessible. Soil was abundant. But still, the scale is impressive. The people connected to Emerald Mound were ancestors of the Natchez Indians. By the time Europeans arrived in the late 1600s, the Natchez were still using the mound as a ceremonial center. That means Emerald Mound was not abandoned quickly. It remained important for centuries. European explorers described seeing structures on top of the mound, buildings made of wood and thatch, sacred fires burning, leaders holding council. At the center of Natchez belief was the Great Sun, a leader believed to have spiritual power connected to the sun itself. Emerald Mound likely played a key role in that political and religious system, but we do not know everything. We do not know the exact ceremonies performed there. We do not know what songs were sung. We do not know the private conversations held on that high platform overlooking the land. The mound itself feels silent now. But imagine standing on top of it 800 years ago. You would see villages below, fields being farmed, smoke rising from cooking fires, people gathering for ritual events. The mound was not just a structure, it was a stage of power. Now here is something even more interesting. Emerald Mound was not built all at once. Archaeologists believe it was originally a smaller mound. Over time, it was expanded, widened, and raised. That suggests long-term planning, generations working on the same sacred place. That tells us something important. This was not a temporary society. It was stable enough to invest in projects that took decades. But like many ancient centers, change came. By the early 1700s, conflict between the Natchez and French colonists led to violence and war. After the Natchez uprising in 1729 and the brutal response that followed, the Natchez people were scattered. Many were killed, others were enslaved. Some joined other tribes. Emerald Mound lost its original purpose. The wooden structures on top disappeared. Weather and time erased them. The sacred fires went out. And what remained was earth. Just earth. Now let's talk about the present condition of Emerald Mound. The positive side is strong. The site is protected by the National Park Service, is part of the Natchez Trace Parkway. It is preserved. It is monitored. Visitors can walk up a set of steps to reach the top safely. Informational signs explain its history. The mound itself is still massive and impressive. Grass covers it, protecting the soil from erosion. It is clean and maintained. There is also increasing awareness today about indigenous history. Emerald Mound is recognized as one of the most important Native American earthworks in the United States. That recognition brings protection and respect. But there are negatives too. Even though it is protected, erosion is always a threat. Rainwater slowly washes soil away. Natural settling changes its shape over time. Grass must be carefully maintained. Too much foot traffic can damage the surface. Climate change may increase heavy rainfall, which could accelerate erosion. Another negative is that much of its deeper meaning is lost. Without written records from the original builders, we rely on archaeology and early European descriptions. Those descriptions were written from outside perspectives and may not fully capture the spiritual importance of the site. Also, compared to places like Cahokia in Illinois, Emerald Mound does not receive the same level of national attention. Many Americans have never heard of it. That lack of awareness can be dangerous. When people do not know a place is important, they may not value its preservation as strongly. Still, if you visit Emerald Mound today, the feeling is powerful. You climb the steps, you reach the top, the land stretches around you. The Mississippi sky feels wide and open. It is quiet, no buildings remain, no fires, just wind moving across grass. But if you close your eyes, you can imagine the past layered beneath your feet. Ceremonies, decisions, beliefs, leadership. In my opinion, Emerald Mound is one of the strongest reminders that advanced societies existed here long before modern America. It challenges the old idea that North America was empty or simple before European arrival. This mound proves planning, organization, and spiritual depth. At the same time, I believe we must treat it not as a tourist attraction, but as a sacred space. It is part of living native history. Descendants of the Matches people still exist today within other tribal nations. The present situation of Emerald Mound is stable but sensitive. It is protected under federal care. It is open to visitors. It is maintained regularly. But like all earthen structures, it depends on continued attention. Natural forces never stops. Time never stops. Right now, Emerald Mound stands strong in Mississippi. It does not shine like stone pyramids. It does not tower like skyscrapers. But it rises quietly from the land, holding centuries of memory beneath its grass-covered surface. And sometimes, the quietest places hold the deepest stories.